Good afternoon. This afternoon, we would like to tell you a little bit about piloting access to the Belgian Web Archive for scientific research, how we went about our methodological exploration. So some of you may know the PROMISE project was looking at piloting a federal Belgian web archive. And now, as we approach the end of the project, we would like to explore how we can provide access to this web archive for scientific research. To do that, we looked at 3 different methodologies. Firstly, how do existing web archives provide access to their collections for research? Then, what can we learn from existing research initiatives using web archives? And finally, how can we use personas to evaluate software for the discovery, delivery, and analysis of archived web data? If you're interested in the Belgian PROMISE project, you can find the website there. Now I'll hand over to Eveline to tell you a bit about our user requirements survey.
So what we did in the PROMISE project, we did an analysis of the user requirements for a web archive. We did this by launching a survey that was filled out by several profiles, so researchers, but also the broad public and historians and archivists. And the results are available in a dashboard on the website that is shown in the slides. So if you're interested, definitely take a look at those results. So what I will be telling or giving you some insights about is how existing web archives provide access to their collections for research. So as you might know, the research on web archives is strongly delimited by the conditions of access. And Jane Winters identified different types of access in the research with UK web data. And we distinct 4 types of access. So the ability to read a web page is not something evident, as access restrictions to web archives can also vary greatly between institutions, ranging from very restricted access to being freely accessible online to all. In the table shown, we show the results from the PROMISE project, and we see that some initiatives have their web archive available for consultation online or on the premises of their domain. Then if we see on the next slide, we see that although some web archives are freely accessible, like the Portuguese web archive, they only allow users to interact with the reproduction of older versions of a website in the same way that the browser does, for example, via the Wayback Machine, as is shown in the example. So actually they do not give access to the actual work files, and this is actually limiting the research to only navigating and reading and searching on the archived web page. So some heritage institutions publish their derivative data. For example, the National Library of the Netherlands, they have published some seed lists of their collection on the Chinese community due to copyright issues. So now we have collected over 100 of petabytes of unique information, but what happens when it comes to analyze it? So for some research questions, using a Wayback Machine would be enough, but this tool provides replay for web archival content, but however, it suffers when it comes to asking questions at scale. So instead of a replay, scholars in these cases need to work with web archives as data. So the underlying web archive files or work files needs to be acquired. So however, working with these work files at the scale requires 2 things: the ability and the skills to use the specialized software, and this is not something evident. So the final type of access to be considered is that it is promoted by publication of both the research findings and the data. So one of the main ways in which researchers will begin to navigate to the web archives is by following the paths of others. So the literature is finally beginning to emerge, and also with the recent launch of the journal Internet Histories, it is providing an outlet for humanities researchers. And also browsing the collections in the Archives Unleashed cloud, or to interactively explore and work with the Web Archive data in the Archives Unleashed Jupyter Notebook can facilitate this access. Also, the web archiving initiatives themselves are seeking to engage in this research community by showing interest in the researchers' needs and requirements. And in this way, they improve their methods and tools based on questions that are asked by their users. And I will now give the word back to Sally.
Thanks. So the second area of research we looked at is what can we learn from existing research initiatives using web archives? So one of the first initiatives was the Buddha Archive, the big UK domain data for the arts and humanities. I think this looked very much at raising awareness of web archives as a research resource. One of the activities within this project was to award 10 bursaries to researchers in order to be able to use the web archive for their data. This was really important to raise the profile and also the interaction of researchers with the UK Web Archive. Secondly, the RESOAR conference, which is now reaching its 4th conference coming up next year, was very important for the community building. Web archives are complex data sets, so we don't need to go it alone. So with the RESOAR conference, the deadline for call for papers is 15th of October. So if you would like to get involved, please do so. This was a very important aspect for community building. Earlier this year, the WARCnet, funded by the Danish Research Council. This is a research collaboration and looking at web archive network for researching web domains and events. This, I think, even moves beyond and more forward than than RESOAR, looking at in-depth research and collaboration between web archive researchers. For example, in the WARCnet network, there are 4 working groups, and together they can perform transnational research related to web archives. Finally, because of the complexity of this data, we need to share data, we need to share tools and workflows. Therefore, the underlying research infrastructures for using the web archive, archived web are extremely important. For example, the IIPC has their research speaker series where different tools are introduced by experts. Here you can see Tim Sherratt's presentation recently about the GLAM workbench for web archive resources as just one of those examples. Now, over to Peter.
Thank you, Sally. So I'll talk a bit about how we use personas to evaluate software for the discovery, the delivery, and analysis of archived web data. So the first step that we did is reuse some of the tools that are listed on this nice spreadsheet. I included the link to the living document on this slide that was created by the Harvard Library. So if you go to the next slide, you can see, oh no, I omitted it. So we took a bunch of tools and then we reused the personas that were created in the Corpus project, a project led by the National Library of France. And personas are actually fictional characters that are created based on research, and that can be really helpful if you want to understand user needs and experiences. So the Corpus project created 5 personas that vary a lot in terms of ICT literacy, but also in terms of domain knowledge. For example, Cecile, a 50-year-old art history professor, has very low ICT skills, but high domain knowledge. While Alexis, for example, is a 20-year-old data scientist who has obviously a lot of ICT skills, but lacks the domain knowledge because he's really not trained in human or social sciences. So with those 2 data points, the tools from the Harvard Library spreadsheet and the personas from the Corpus project, we started working, and we looked at how each tool could be used by each persona. We did it with 2 independent researchers, so we scored each tool for each persona And afterwards, we put our scores together and we discussed if the scores deviated from each other. In that way, we created this table where you can see the tools in the rows and the personas in the columns. And 3 pluses in this table denote that the persona would have no problem at all with working with the tool because they have the ICT literacy, while 1 plus sign indicates that the persona will have difficulties in using the tool unless he or she puts a substantial amount of effort in learning new skills. So on this slide, we see a bit more info on Alexis. As I already said, he's a data scientist, so he does not encounter problems when he wants to set up, for example, the Archives Unleashed toolkit on a dedicated server. While on the other hand, Alexis will probably have problems or issues when he actually tries to work with the results from the tools because clearly he does not have the sufficient domain knowledge to interpret the results coming out of the tool. Cecile, on the other hand, a 50-year-old arts history professor, has very low ICT skills. She was never trained in the use of that kind of software. So she will encounter quite a lot of problems when she wants to work with more complex software, for example, Social Feed Manager or Archives Unleashed toolkit. So she will need to acquire new skills, or more likely will set up collaborations with other colleagues, for example, with Alexis, the data scientist. So in the end, this brings us to the conclusion that we need to bring archives closer to researchers, that we need to support researchers who want to work hands-on with work files, not only in terms of supplying them with enough data and enough metadata, but also in terms of supporting them technically.
So in conclusion, it was great that we could really draw on the experiences of the Web Archive community to explore how we could pilot access to the Belgian Web Archive for scientific research. So what we found out is that a variety of access modes, including data level access, are crucial to provide access for scientific research. The importance of collaboration with the web archiving community through conferences such as this one and the RESOAR conference and the WARCnet community are all crucial to be able to collaborate with other researchers working in this complex domain. And finally, the area of increased digital literacy skills or interdisciplinary collaboration is extremely important. So in terms of next steps, the Promise project ended at the end of last year, and now we have a new project set up called the KBR Digital Research Lab, which is a collaboration between KBR, the Royal Library of Belgium, and Ghent University. Within that environment, we can start providing data level access to the Belgian Web Archive. We can work together with other digital humanities researchers in the area of web archive research. And we can also see how we can increase the digital literacy skills or facilitate and encourage interdisciplinary collaboration in this area. Thanks very much.